Welcome. Good morning. I'm so happy to see people in the room. We know we have a whole contingent of virtual participants, and we're so happy that they're here too. But we just weren't sure, especially over the last few weeks, how many people would actually make it to Baltimore. So you all are miracles sitting here in the seats. Thank you for being here. I'm Terry DeVoe, the Associate Deputy Director for the Grants to States program. This program, as many of you know, is a federal-state partnership. We take our relationships with you very seriously because it helps head off problems for the program, among other things, but also because you're just such wonderful people, and we enjoy getting together with you as much as we can. So this being the first time we're in conference together with physical people in a room in 2 years, it's very exciting, and we're a little rusty. And also we're doing this hybrid for the first time ever, so please bear with us if we have some technical things that crop up along the way. We're learning. For those of you who are in the room, we're just going to do some health and safety preliminaries. We have maintained a mask mandate for this conference space here on the 5th floor. You're definitely going to see people in the hotel that aren't wearing masks. It's not a hotel requirement, it's an IMLS requirement. So just that we're all clear, we're not trying to send mixed messages, but in consultation with our legal team, we're going to keep the mask mandate in place, except for speakers at the podium. So thanks for helping us maintain that. And I think we've all, encountered people who will nurse a bottle of water for 8 hours in order to just keep their mask down. Please don't be that person. If you need a drink, we understand, but just, get that mask back up when you're done. And we're all trying to take care of each other as much as ourselves. So we care about each other. We want to be safe. We have dots that I think most of you that are registered have put on your name tags by this point. The green dots are if you're comfortable giving hugs or handshakes. The yellow dots with the little dash through them are more like an elbow bump or a fist bump. And if you're really trying to social distance and not have contact with people, then we've got the red dots with the little X. We've got restrooms out through the doors and to the right. We've got some more restrooms down the hall towards the elevator bank, so hopefully there's plenty of restrooms to meet all the needs. For the hybrid conference, for those of you who are in the room, the thing we're just going to keep emphasizing is to use the microphone. They need to hear us out in the virtual land, and we need to hear it on the recording because we are recording this. That's also a first for us. We haven't had the benefit of being able to be in a room and record this ever. So we're going to get good audio with the recording, and we've got 2 mics set up for questions, which is a little different than we've done in the past, where we tend to run the mics around the room. So this time we're just going to let you exercise your standing legs and go over to the microphones if you have a question or a comment when the time comes. We've also got Cindy and Laura, colleagues at IMLS, work in the virtual contingent over here. And when they have questions, Cindy and Laura are going to elevate them using a mic of their own. So we will be able to integrate our colleagues who are coming to us virtually. I think I've noted all the main sessions are going to be recorded. So we just want to disclose that. And with that, I think we're going to go into what we're calling the icebreaker, the getting to know you part. So what we'd like to do is we're going to take 8 minutes and have you in table groups introduce yourselves. For those of you who are here in the room, we have an adaptation for the virtual folks I'll explain in just a minute. We'd like you to, just briefly tell each other your name and your state and maybe your role, and then figure out 2 ways of organizing yourselves. This can be alphanumeric, it can be something altogether different by height, perhaps. But you can stand up, you can figure out how you're going to organize yourselves. That'll be a way of getting to know each other. Find 2 ways of organizing yourselves. And the breakout folks are going to actually enter a breakout room at this point. I'm sorry, the virtual folks are going to enter a breakout room and do a slight modification of this that Laura and Cindy are going to run. And then we're all going to come back together, and we're going to go around maybe we will do a run around the mic at that point, but we're going to have everybody in the room introduce themselves very briefly. You don't have to reveal your order of how you lined yourself up. You don't have to recreate that for us. But somebody at the table just tell us how you organized yourselves, and then we'll all have the benefit of knowing. So with that, I'm going to set the clock for 8 minutes, and go ahead and introduce yourselves. All right, we're going to start with the around the room introductions, real brief ones, and then we're going to go to the virtual introductions with Cindy and Laura. So Dennis, kick us off. I think they're controlling it. It's good.
Sorry. Okay. Hi. I'm Dennis Nangle. I'm one of the senior program officers for the Grants to States program. Yep, and yeah, I live in Maryland.
Hi, my name is Madison Bowles. I'm also a senior program officer with the Grants to States program. We're so happy to see everybody today. Should we say how we organized ourselves?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so Dennis and I organized ourselves by birth year, which is the same year. And also the same month. And then hometown. I'm from Richmond, Virginia.
And I was born in Philly.
Thank you.
Amy Hebner, New York, and I'm the LSTA coordinator, among other things.
Janet McKinney, and from Maine, and I'm the Director of Library Development and the LSTA coordinator.
Lori Fisher from New Hampshire. I'm the Assistant State Librarian.
Jeanette Schaefer, Vermont. I'm the Assistant State Librarian for Library Advancement and the LSTA coordinator. And we organized ourselves around zodiac signs. So it's Janet, Lori, Aries, Taurus, Leo, Virgo. And then also who's the furthest from the ocean. So that's Amy is the furthest, me, Lori, and then Janet.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Jamie Ball, Arizona Library Development Administrator.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Cowan Henderson, Tennessee. I am the Library Development Director and LSTA Coordinator.
Carmen Redding, Bismarck, North Dakota. I am Library Services Director, which is Cataloging and Library Development, LSTA Coordinator. We organized ourselves many ways, and for the most part, it was this all the time. And then a few variations, but.
My name is Hector Reillo. I live in Puerto Rico. I'm teacher librarian, but now Operations Manager in the Department of Education, Service Program Manager. Así que, thank you. My English leader. Sorry.
You're doing great.
Nice to meet you guys. My name is Ramonita Lopez. I'm Assistant Director from the Fiscal Administrator Area, Office of Federal Affairs, Puerto Rico Department of Education. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Brenda Hall from Iowa. I am the Library Development Director and the LSTA Coordinator. Nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is Alice Smith, and I'm the LSTA Coordinator and also the State Data Coordinator for Kansas.
Hi, I'm Mary Ramey. I'm the LSTA Coordinator for Maryland, and welcome to Baltimore.
Good morning. I'm Amy Parker DeSorbo. I am from the United States Virgin Islands. I'm the Territorial Director for Libraries, Archives, and Museums. I am everything that we do with you guys, so thank you. I'm going to pass the mic because I don't want to be a mic hog.
So we organized ourselves in alphabetical order by first name. We also organized ourselves by birth year. I'm not going to say who was the oldest.
I'm Angela Fox from Indiana. I'm the LSTA coordinator there, as well as the SDC.
Hi, I'm Whitney Payne from Georgia, and I am actually the state data coordinator there, but I've been the interim LSTA person for just maybe 3 months, but we're so glad we've just announced our person who will be the actual LSTA person, and she's virtually online. Are they going to be announcing themselves?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I will let her do that.
I am Susan Mark from Wyoming. I am outreach librarian at our marketing office, and I'm one of our 2 LSTA coordinators.
Conrado Saldivar from the Wyoming State Library, outreach and development librarian, SDC, and the other LSTA coordinator.
I'm Sarah Black from DC. I do special projects for the DC Public Library, and I am DC's LSTA coordinator.
And we organized ourselves by birth month, which we almost went around. January, that's right. January, February, April, October, December. And then we organized ourselves alphabetically by the color of our clothing. So it was black, blue, green, red, and teal.
Love it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Liana Morales, and I am the LSTA Grant Programs Manager at the New Mexico State Library, and I also manage the Rural Services Program.
Sue Lynn Jones, LSTA Coordinator, Nevada.
Rebecca Camp, I'm the data coordinator from Montana.
Kim Armentrout from Virginia. I manage state aid. I'm the SDC, and I'm taking over LSTA duties from John Metz, who I believe will be introducing himself virtually as well. We organized ourselves by state capitals. We also organized ourselves by birth month, and then it fell into zodiac sign.
I'm Nicolette Buffoni. I am the LSTA coordinator and library development manager for Rhode Island.
I'm Jennifer Peacock. I'm the Deputy Director of Administrative Services and the LSTA Coordinator for Mississippi.
Hey, I'm Lynn Burris. I am the Financial Director for Mississippi, and we organized ourselves by birth month. So.
Catherine Prince, the LSTA Coordinator for North Carolina.
Susan Forbes, Assistant State Librarian from North Carolina.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Bushman. I'm the LSTA Coordinator and Library Development Manager of the state of Washington. And the last time we were in person 3 years ago was my 3rd day, so it feels good.
I am Rob Favini from the Board of Library Commissioners in Massachusetts. I'm the LSTA Coordinator and Development Director. Should I do that? Okay. I was very troubled by the amount of personally identifiable information flowing out on the internet.
My bad.
We did organize ourselves other ways, but one way we did is by favorite baseball teams. So we had the Durham Bulls representing the minor leagues, Tampa Bay Rays, the Mariners, and the Red Sox. And we'll let you all try to figure out who roots for who.
My name is Faye Fisher. I'm the Grants and Contracts Analyst at the Utah State Library. I also do special projects for the Library for the Blind.
I'm Rachel Cook. I'm the LSTA Coordinator at the Utah State Library and a Library Consultant.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Evan Struble. I'm the Associate State Librarian for Library Development at the State Library of Ohio, here on behalf of our vacant LSTA Coordinator position. I have no idea how that happened. IMLS. I shouldn't cough on the microphone in a pandemic. So we thought we were being super clever at this table by going alphabetical by our astrological sign, Jeanette, and some other people. Very clever ideas around the table. Aries, Taurus, Leo. I know you're shocked. And then also alphabetical by 3 distinct master's degrees that we have: Masters of Art Administration, English, and Library Science.
I'm Clara Mamura. I'm the LSTA Coordinator and SDC for Alaska.
I'm Alex Delboy. I'm the LSTA coordinator for Wisconsin.
I'm Kathleen Moeller-Pfeiffer. I'm Deputy State Librarian for Library Support Services, the New Jersey State Library, and we organized ourselves by name, by last name, and also by birth month.
I am Kristen Cook. I'm the deputy in Arkansas, and I also serve as the SDC.
I'm Debbie Hall. I'm the LSTA coordinator at the Arkansas State Library.
Hi, I'm Karen Reish. I'm the LSTA coordinator and other duties as assigned at the State Library of Michigan.
I'm Beth Milburn. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. And we organized ourselves first by position, deputy, and LSTA coordinators. And then second, by how long we've worked at the State Library. I'm not going to tell.
Very nice. I think we've done all the tables in the room, which means we're going to go to our virtual introduction, slightly modified. And I'm going to, oh, thank you, Beth. I was going to do that. Beth's doing that. Okay, virtual folks, who do we have with us?
Well, it's, can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. We have quite a few people in the virtual room, and it was a bit wild and woolly because we've never quite done this before, and it's very new for Laura and myself. So we're asking everybody for a lot of grace today. We have 35 folks in there, and chat was a lot. We actually had a little bit of tech trouble, so the breakout room did not happen. And so I'm just going to tell you that we have, I'm going to miss a lot of states in here, but we have folks from everywhere from Florida to California, Georgia, Ohio, Texas, Massachusetts, Iowa, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and everywhere, and Hawaii, who is here at 3 o'clock in the morning, and everywhere in between. I know I've missed a lot of you, but thank you all so much for being in the virtual world with us today.
Yay. All right. Well, that was our breakout trial number 1. We'll have more. We'll see how it goes as we go along. I'm going to finish up this initial welcome time with a little bit of where we've come from and where we're going as a program, and also as a conference, where we're headed the next few days. We have been a lot of places. Since a year ago, you all have been helping us administer and report for the first time on these stimulus funds known as the CARES Act. So that was a big, big deal. Alongside that, you've also been administering a second set of stimulus funds known as the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Just to put that in perspective, CARES Act came in at $30 million for the program and ARPA at $178 million, which basically doubled our program budget that year. And so I'm assuming also doubled your work, maybe tripled your work on some level. Alongside that, the government saw it befit to throw some regulatory changes at all of us. So we were all navigating new Code of Federal Regulation changes, specifically the change in the DUNS, which used to identify all entities that got government funds, to the unique entity identifier, and particularly those with subawards. I know you've been doing yeoman's work trying to interpret that and navigate it and make sure that it passes down. So thank you. Many of you helped us with site visit adaptations. We, as a program, try to do a site visit to every one of the 52 states within the 5-year cycle, and we could not do that over the last 2 years. We were threatening to fall behind, so we did some virtual site visits instead. And we appreciate all of you who were flexible with us and went along on that journey, which is not nearly as satisfying as an in-person site visit, but you made it work. We appreciate. The statute, alongside all this, said it's time to do your 5-year evaluations and your 5-year plans. And since it's set in statute, there's nothing we can do about that timing. So this was layered on top of everything else. You came along with us on a community of practice journey for these 5-year evaluations. We thought it went really well. There were 8 distinct monthly sessions on that. We're going to hear a little bit about that in the next session. And in March, those evaluations came due, and we have the honor of having analyzed a bit of that and being able to talk about it with you in terms of the story that we can tell out of these evaluations. In 2018, our statute had changed to bring in the 3 Pacific freely associated states fully into the program, and over the past year, they became fully integrated in it, completing their first state program report. They had submitted their first plan, and they submitted their first evaluation. So now, instead of 56 states and territories in the Grants to States program, we have 59. And so all of it is now, everybody's on the even keel. We're all doing the same thing, and we're really excited about that. And after a 6-month vacancy, sorry, Evan, we took the great resources of the USA and plugged them into the federal sector in the form of Cindy Boyden, who's been with us just a few weeks, and already you can see we've put her into the deep end. So glad you're here, Cindy. We know that layered on top of all of this were just realities of living through a pandemic. You all, in addition to those stimulus funds and figuring out, how to work through a pandemic, we're helping local libraries navigate the pandemic, providing leadership for your states during the pandemic, and figuring out how to modify federal grant conferences and programs and workshops during a pandemic. We know this involved a lot of creativity and adaptation on your part. We've had new ways of working together and gathering. We had 2 virtual conferences for Grants to States over the last 2 years. This is our first hybrid conference, so we're continuing to adapt. Layered against all of this, we've seen so much strange attention on libraries in the news that we know that is affecting your work, that you again are looked to as the leaders in your state to help navigate these issues, and that there's a lot of stress and strife happening in libraries right now. Some of us during the pandemic had colleagues that either retired or took new jobs that created new work for some of us. And some of us even lost friends and loved ones during this pandemic. So we can't come back together without acknowledging that we've changed. There's a lot that's different. Luckily, we've had some helpers. Mr. Rogers has a great quote about during hard times, looking to the helpers. And we've had helpers. We have a mentor core in this LSTA program that comes from all of you. And we've had some retirements in this fold. But if you are in this room right now and you are on this slide as one of our recent mentors, would you please stand? And if you're virtual, would you shout yourselves out? Thank you, mentors. Thank you, past mentors. And some of you have stayed on to be current mentors, and we've added a whole host of new mentors. So if you are on this slide, would you stand or shout yourselves out in the chat? We are so grateful to have helpers in this time of pandemic. As a program, we are looking ahead to where we're headed. We hope you all know that there's a deadline next week. The 5-year plans are due, and that hopefully caps off this brutal, crazy year of so much work for all of you. But the work won't end. It'll hopefully just be different. We are working to go into this next 5-year cycle with a fresh and new 5-year site visit checklist. And we haven't unveiled that yet to you. It's still kind of working its way through the approval channels, but we hope it'll be streamlined and more plain language and more straightforward. So we've been working on that as a program ourselves. Once we have the 5-year plans in place, we will be looking to you in the fall to help us refresh our state profile pages on the IMLS website. This is something we did 5 years ago as well. We want to make sure we have some newer, fresher projects represented. We may ask for your help with some photos or permissions around those photos. We hope it won't be a big lift, but we want to make sure that you're involved in this and we're not just sticking something up that you haven't seen before. Along with those regulatory changes I mentioned about the UEI came one nice gift, and that is that all federal programs across the government, if you're grant making, now get not 90 days to report, but 120 days. So for you, who have always had this end of December, winter holiday, end of the calendar year time, this deadline of your reports being due, we're moving it. We're moving it to the end of January, so you're welcome. We hope that'll be an improvement on some level. There is still a 90-day requirement for your subrecipients, and there is still a 90-day requirement for your interim financial report, which we hope is not a big lift. It's a one-page form. So that one's still due at the end of December, but we're going to keep repeating this just until it sinks in. It's new. It's exciting. We are looking at some extensions for the American Rescue Plan Act funds. We've already granted a whole bunch, so if you're sort of on the fence, not sure whether you should come in for that, know that you would be in good company. And we will be analyzing program impact over the coming year, both stimulus funds and some of the 5-year activities that you've helped us with. For the conference, we've got what we think is a really solid, exciting set of sessions for you. We're going to talk about the 5-year evaluations next. Our colleagues in the Office of Research and Evaluation have been doing some really interesting research work on social well-being, which we think is well-timed to the launch of your 5-year plans. So we wanted to give you kind of a digestible insight into this really great research. We have a panel from some of you here in the audience and a virtual presenter on just diversity and access for all and reaching diverse audiences, which we know is a hot topic right now. So we're going to treat it with care. We're going to talk about the 5-year plans. We're going to talk about our first look at impact coming out of the CARES reporting that you all did and what we might anticipate for ARPA. Tomorrow, travel God's willing, we're going to hear from our director, Crosby Kemper. We're going to talk about telling our story collectively. We as a federal agency want to tell a good story about the impact of these federal funds, and we depend on all of you to help us with that. And then we're going to try a little bit of a different endpoint for the conference than we've done in past years with what we're calling burning questions. It's been said that sometimes it's more important to ask the right question than to have all the answers. So I want you all to be thinking, you all come in kind of unique individuals in your states doing this work. There's nobody really like you. You come together, you have this great opportunity to learn from your peers. So think about what you would want to ask once you get together in a room tomorrow. Like, what would be a good question to ask of your peers? And everybody will get a chance to ask one burning question. Maybe more, but at least ask one. Some details. In your conference packet that hopefully you picked up at registration for those of you in the room, we do have a conference survey. You are welcome to fill it out as we go along, or we'll prompt you again at the end of the second day to fill it out. And if you have to leave today for some reason before the end of the conference, we're going to collect those at the registration desk. If you're virtual, we're going to share the URL for the conference survey with you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. Every year we learn from the conference survey and we make adaptations accordingly. We're going to try another new thing that we're calling the peer-to-peer appreciation wall. It's hanging out over here on the side of the room for those of you here in person. And we envisioned you just giving each other kudos. It could be for something you did, something small, a small kindness you did here at the conference, I don't know, making us laugh, thank you, Evan. Or maybe something that's happened over the past year or two that you just want to shout out your colleagues here in the room. This is not an IMLS appreciation wall. This is your appreciation wall. If you want to tell us something nice, just do it in the survey. But this is for you, and we have sticky notes at the table where if you're pondering what nice note you want to put up on the appreciation wall, you can copy it down and just slap it up there, or I think you can probably write directly on the wall. We'll see how filled up it gets. But we're going to try that. We're going to encourage it throughout the course of the conference. We also have a parking lot hanging out over here. Parking lot is for questions that might pertain to the sessions that we've allotted time for, but we run out of time, or things that you were hoping would be addressed that IMLS can answer that are not getting addressed somehow. And we can revisit the parking lot tomorrow morning and try to answer some of those questions. So that's a place for those questions. We have a dine around dinner wall over here. I know that there was some movement on the listserv around a dinner getting organized, but if you didn't get in on that, or you have aspirations to meet with some of your peers here, there's a few places that we've researched that are close by, and you can put your name on the wall, and we'll get you to kind of meet up after the end of the day today and make sure that you know what time you're all getting together. If you haven't been to our orientation last week or find yourself drowning in all the acronyms we're throwing around, there is an online handout, a little primer for our program that's online, linked with the conference agenda. It's also linked here. And we've got a theme for this conference. It's news, so extra, it's coming. You're going to hear all about it in moments. I just want to end with some initial appreciation. We could not do this conference without a dedicated meeting planner, and I don't think they're in the room. But Matt Burdetsky and Mindy, who were registering you, and our colleague staff, have been doing so much work to get you all here, for those of you in person in particular, and setting the room and just making sure it's nice. And we truly could not do this without them. The Grants to State staff, believe it or not, have been planning this conference for about 9 months. It's like a labor of love. And so we're happy it's here, but boy, these guys have worked so hard and have put so much of their heart and soul into this conference. So we hope that it is received well, and if it's not, just tell us about it and we'll do better. Our Office of Research and Evaluation staff at IMLS are kind of our co-pilots on this journey, and you're going to hear from them in different sessions throughout today in particular. They help us fund this conference. We decide that it's worth our administrative funds to bring you here, to train you, that is a good return on investment, and we hope that that posture from our leadership will continue. But it's thanks to our Office of Research and Evaluation that we can combine our funds and make sure that fiscally we can make this happen. We know that some of you are going to be presenting. We're so excited about that. And for those of you who are here attending or online attending, we so appreciate you. I've been putting this slide up a few times at our different intersections with you. We can do hard things. I think initially it was kind of a rallying cry, like, come on, we can do hard things. I think now it's more of a statement like, we can do hard things. So thank you for all the hard things that you've been doing with us over the past few years. And we are going to go forward and do more hard things. Thank you. Now, I had a question slide up there, but we are going to go right into our next session, which has turned out to be 2 virtual presenters. The travel and coming in person gods were not with us on this one, but I'd love to introduce our 2 colleagues out in the field from our Office of Research and Evaluation. These 2 are on Matt Birnbaum's team. Matt heads the Office of Research and Evaluation, and I've come to think of his hire of Emily Plowman as one of the most strategic things he's ever done. We were short staff in that office, and he said, hey, let me go to my library statistics working group colleague, Emily, who has also run the Public Library Association's Project Outcome for years and years. We could not be more blessed to have her with us, helping us through, in our case, the evaluations journey. And shortly after Emily kicked off that community of practice for the 5-year evaluations, we brought Talitha Darrington on board. She is also a very seasoned, robust evaluator, lots of experience. She comes to us on the AIR contract, and she also journeyed with us on this community of practice evaluations journey. So they are going to theoretically present virtually, and I might be advancing their slides. We're going to see how this all works. But let me stop talking and see if we can get audio for our two virtual presenters.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful. Hi. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'm one of the travel gods weren't looking in my favor last night as the storms flew through Baltimore. And I should share that we organized ourselves virtually in a couple of groups. There's a handful of us who didn't make it because of the weather. So that was group one, and the other group of our virtual attendees is just by default, we are all virtual attendees. So we did our icebreaker. We were excited to be able to get to see everyone on chat, and certainly miss seeing you in person. I'm gonna go ahead and just talk through our presentation really briefly. We have a fair amount of time that we're going to want you to be talking with each other at tables, and we'll be talking with each other at chat. We do have another extension of our ORE team in the room today, Madison Sampson. Madison, if you could just stand up and wave. She'll be helping with facilitating the questions or any questions that come up on the ground, or any kind of organization around the report outs we're going to have at the end of today's session. She found out about this role as she was on the train coming up from DC today, so please be kind to her. And thank you again to the Grants to State team for all of your hard work. You make this look so easy. All right, so let's go back to the slides. Today's goals for our presentation are, we're going to talk a little bit about what we learned in the community of practice. We're going to highlight what we've learned from all the hard work of the evaluations that you all have submitted to the Grants to States team, and the Grants to States team did such a good job of reading through and doing the analysis for. And then we're just going to have us do some around the room activities where we're just really reflecting on what we learned from this last round of evaluations. We are a research and evaluation shop, so of course we're going to want to know hard and easy measurement activities. And then we'll have each of the tables report out, as well as what we can see in chat. Just by show of hands, and I can't see the room, so I'm going to rely on either Terry or Madison to help with a rough hand count, and I'll monitor chat here. How many of you were present working from the total of the last 5 years, where you're here from initial plan development, all the way to evaluation? Show of hands, people in chat, if you can just say me. Just try to get a sense of everybody who went from inception to completion of one round of plans.
There are about 10 hands in the room of 40-some folks.
Okay. And looks like we have about six or seven people. Jen Clifton shared this as her third plan and third evaluation. A few more, 7, 8, good. We have a good group of veterans on the call today too. And how many of you this was the first time going through the evaluation, whether you were here here from the beginning of the plan work or joined at any point in time? And I should say, I see Katie McDonough was also, this is her third round, second for Terry.
I'd say we have just short of 20 hands in the room.
Okay.
About double.
Okay. So you're all here. So first of all, congratulations, you survived. Looks like we have about the same distribution on chat also. A couple of hybrids. Some people were working in other areas and came over for the evaluation. Great, and this is having worked with evaluations for a long time, especially in the library world. the evaluations are just as much fun as they can be painful sometimes, especially when you're out there collecting data. But I hope today that what we're going to present is just going to be inspiring and help you realize just all of this hard collective work that you all have put in over the past 5 years or longer. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Talitha, and she's going to talk about the community of practice that we set up for the first time.
Thank you, Emily. And is my sound working?
Yes.
Great. Great, thank you. Well, we'll talk about natural disasters and pandemics later. I'm on the pandemic side of why I'm not with you. I got the COVID, I'm better. I finally tested negative, woohoo, but public health. So I'm gonna start out by summarizing what we did and then turn briefly to what we learned about the implementation piece. And then spend most of the time sharing the main discussion topics and the topical things that the community of practice covered and what they shared out as challenges and problem-solving successes. And many of the names I'm seeing in the chat are the names that I saw on the community of practice Zoom chat. So welcome back, nice to be with you again virtually. Okay, so in this slide, you can see that Terry mentioned the community of practice had 8 meetings from August of 2021 to March 22. It included evaluation and LSTA representatives and other types of library representatives from 46 states and territories. It was facilitated by staff from IMLS, Office of Research and Evaluation, and that's a third person way of saying Emily and myself. And there was a mix of very seasoned evaluators, some who had worked with states for multiple years, multiple states, and some evaluators that had just signed their contract in January of 22. We also had library representatives, also with a range of experience, as you are seeing in the chat here. Next slide, please. So the online community platform was useful as a repository of documents, but it wasn't used for engagement by the evaluators or the state reps. So for example, the chat features, discussion features. Communications were mainly from the facilitators, but it did create that useful repository of recordings and slides from meetings. So, and that's fine, just an observation about the engagement piece. I think we all have too many engagement devices these days. So we observed people's level of comfort in talking increased over time. It's probably not surprising. It's a transition from more of a one-way pushing out of information to then more participants intentionally using the chats to people unmuting and talking on camera. Not exactly linear, but an increase. And I'll share the topics that came from these discussions on the next slides. But first and finally for mechanics, it was helpful to have this mix of evaluators and LSTA library reps. And it was also helpful to have that mix and that broad range of experience. Next slide, please. So let's turn to the major discussion themes, and I'll give examples of these topics. So the first sets of slides are loosely in chronological order, not necessarily, but the last slide is definitely about the final meeting. So one big topic, money, and distinguishing LSTA funding from CARES and ARPA funding. So examples from the discussion included the challenges of tracking money, technology, were the data even collected, were they useful, were they available, but also in terms of the complexity of what was happening due to nimble responses to ramping things up and then fluid courses of action where things could change rapidly. It does make data collection challenging. So, and then another big topic was the relationship between goals and measurement. People talked about how some are aspirational and will have a longer timeline for achievement, and others that are practical and operational and may have shorter timelines. The group discussed achievement as a metric. What does that mean? How do you measure it? And how do you use it to report in the 3 IMLS reporting categories? This topic was rounded out by the fact that partly achieved should also be a reason to celebrate as well as achieved. And partly achieved should be celebrated it should be celebrated, but especially with those aspirational or long time horizon goals. Next slide, please. So the communities discussed beneficiaries and which ones might be important to measure that aren't currently on the IMLS, in the IMLS reporting categories, like older adults, or maybe you would say seniors or teenagers, those without broadband access, incarcerated individuals were some of the groups that were discussed. There was a lot of discussion about the 10% threshold. People encouraged everyone to report on the lower threshold groups. And because many states focus on smaller percentages of money on many groups, and that can often achieve a high return on investment, low dollars having a high impact. So we discussed the possibilities around lowering the 5% threshold, and IMLS heard us, or you. We heard you all too. And then finally on beneficiaries, states talked about groups that they had not planned to but unexpectedly reached due, mainly to the shift to virtual engagement, being able to extend access. And looking at focal areas, they centered on measurement topics as well, such as can one focal area be counted in two, can one project be counted in two focal areas? For example, counting something in employment and economic development that's only for the library workforce. And so a discussion, an example answer that you would get to this type of question at the community practice was, if you have the rationale that it's helping things like writing resumes and small business development among the library workforce, then yes. If the project is more about supporting degrees or certificates of training for the library workforce, then not so much. So again, talking about the groups that they hadn't reached. Let's see, my notes are going backwards, don't go backwards. Finally about focal areas. We are all overachievers, I think. It's important to remember that IMLS doesn't require or expect states to focus on, address all focus areas. Oh, COVID, our favorite topic, and why I'm standing behind the screen. Pandemic created a crisis, of course, and the federal funds also present a crisis of opportunity. So disruptions discussed were delays in LSTA funded projects getting started or being able to be done at all due to disruptions in the delivery of materials and equipment from supply chains. Workforce impacts, Terry, I caught a little bit of her opening remarks, talked about that, you all know it, including the challenges of hiring staff and also staff not knowing that money are available or having the bandwidth to apply for the money. And then finally, of course, resilience and health, and paying attention to that and promoting that is a challenge. So innovation, some examples were, again, about the virtual meetings actually making participation easier and more equitable. One state reported they had the largest audience of any program they've ever done. We talked about implementing things that have been talked about for a while, but nobody got around to doing them at the time, right? Like starting a statewide board. Talked about getting prepared for and even used to disruptions due to natural disasters and pandemics, so being able to be nimble. And talking about add-on services like health and wellness, shifting beneficiaries, recalibrating your needs, and again, being nimble. We had a robust discussion of what the appropriate word for it more nimble was, and actually it is nimbler, but we had some funny chats on that. Several states found that they were forced to become more nimbler than I used it wrong again, to become nimbler than they thought they could be. And that goes back to Terry's star message at the beginning. So impact, some important discussion points that, projects will show different impact curves. Some are going to be gone completely, like perhaps Braille services due to increasing use of OneDrive. There will be new hybrid programming like telehealth, and increases in, for example, topics like continuing education, and a decrease in planning or library grants. I'm going to mute myself for a second and cough. All right, thank you. So data collection. People had various concerns about data quality for specific measurements and were worried about a dramatic change in COVID. For example, activity level numbers like opening and closing of libraries and other access measures, or lower virtual data collection response rates than when programs and services are in person. So if you're virtual, please fill out the survey for this meeting using the link. A solution to people canceling interviews was, people had to address emergencies, so they canceled interviews. So one idea was to shadow them in a moving interview, not during the emergency, but during an everyday to talk to them. Talking about end user data not being collected at the end of a program, maybe there's a lack of plan or concern about confidentiality. So some had tried online services that were targeted to specific groups that should be the end user groups, and are identifying shareholders who you know are users of the group for interviews. We talked about incentives and the idea of soft incentives to create a culture of participation. And one specific one is the unintentional win of peer-to-peer learning and networking that a focus group participation opportunity provides and that people really missed. Another solution to lower data quality was to take a wider view and look at longer term data from the prior federal fiscal years. And the group talked about the importance of the recommendations from the 5-year evaluation being implemented in the 5-year plan, and we'll summarize that at the end of my segment here. Okay, next one. So we talked about dissemination and the importance of some organizational presentation tips, and but also being sure to transparently describe your limitations and your strengths, and thinking about multimedia formats and audiences. So the group shared ideas on how else they could disseminate beyond websites, emails, texts, visuals, having a communication plan. Talked about what other audiences would be important, like library boards, public officials, and even the people who helped answer surveys or participate in interviews and focus groups. And one cool idea from a community practice member was to use their evaluation and the subsequent plan to teach evaluation to library science students. So we discussed definitions of equity or other terms in relation to the opportunities and constraints in each state. And some specific ideas for my meeting notes are to define whatever term you use in relation to your goals, such as materials outreach and data collection that's reflecting the library users' demographics, and it informs, your actions inform funds distribution, your data. Defining criteria and using it in a process called balanced scorecard planning, and it would be a perspective in this process, whatever term you use, but that concept. And then most importantly, making the logical connection between the data and what the state is doing. We had tips from peers and IMLS process and content guidance, such as using longitudinal data that I mentioned, but also shifting it to a calendar year instead of fiscal year, so you can look at it in relation to external shocks like the pandemic or a hurricane. The second webinar featured those tips from a veteran evaluator that presented to the group. So if you're interested in them and weren't in the community practice, you can get in touch with Emily or myself, and we can share that with you. And finally, the group recommended that IMLS continue the community practice, and I think many of you know that, for the 5-year plan. And this process of continuing to build a culture of evaluation in the library world. So next slide, please. The final challenges from the final meeting were kind of a summary of them, was just really, again, the demands on LSTA coordinators and other state offices, like budgeting, because of this crisis of opportunity of federal funds means more work. So it's a good, hard thing to deal with. Delays in receiving data, there are multiple reasons, not just one reason. So, dealing with those multiple reasons, challenges to data access. And then a big discussion about, good ideas and data being on the cutting room floor. There was discussion about, putting it in an appendix and also using it for the next 5-year plan as kind of a solution. So moving to some big solutions that folks talked about is, streamlining the process in the beginning with introductions to data managers, so there's not in between people, sharing drafts rather than just final products, and building relationships. And all of these activities build relationships to support the collaboration between the evaluator and the LSTA coordinator. And it's, increases efficiency, and it's also fun. And it's important to even, at this final step, continue those discussions of goals. Well, actually, through the evaluation process, discussing goals, project assignments, and vested interests of people to help ensure that they're motivated and understand what needs to be done so they take steps towards your goals, both in the evaluation and in the plan. And application of the learnings to the next plan, which I will summarize at the end of our discussion. So thank you. I have not been looking at the chat, the nimblest. There we go. We got some more nimble fun things. So I will turn it back to Emily.
Thank you, Talitha, and thank you to all of you who participated in the community of practice. This was an inaugural effort. Sometimes it can feel a little challenging to show up and know that we're all expected to contribute, but we had some really great learnings, at least from the IMLS perspective, but it sounded like peer-to-peer also in terms of being able to put this together. And continuing forward, we had some, Grants to States hosted some community of practice meetings on the plan development, and we had some really, really rich discussions there. So we look forward to applying what we learned this time around. But to the next community of practice 5 years down the road when we're working on our next evaluation. But let's go to what we learned looking at the evaluations as a whole. One thing that I honestly would have expected to see collectively throughout what people had planned versus what happened in the evaluation reports is that COVID would really significantly disrupt what you all had planned to do. And definitely that was there. We all know that was there. We all felt it. We all worked to try to adjust to the new reality. But overall, what's really interesting is that those plans and goals that were initially set, the goals and focal areas that were set in the plans, we didn't see the significant change, which is interesting. It just really points to them being broad enough that there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you're able to adjust on the fly or adjust as needed in changing circumstances. And while some of those focal areas in the end look different than what had been planned, there really was the ability to adjust within the plans. And a great example here that I think it was Dennis who shared this was Arkansas didn't do sub-granting prior to COVID, but because their goals were broad enough within their plans, they were able to change to sub-granting because of the COVID disruption. And so, having a plan that's flexible enough for changes, for adaptations is really kind of the punchline on this slide. I'm going to go through the next set of slides pretty quickly. You have a handout in your, you should have a handout in your packets, the top 10 evaluation facts. There's a few more data points we wanted to share on the slides here. Average number of goals across states is 3.4. Average numbers of focal areas is 4.4. That makes sense. A goal is going to be kind of your broad umbrella. Focal areas are going to be a little bit more drilled down, and then those activities will be more discrete. But you'll see, they're not significantly far apart in terms of what you set for goals and what you set for focal areas. On the next slide, we're going to take a look at how goals were reported. So this year, you'll see that we had about 61% of the 231 goals were categorized as achieved. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see the differences here year to year. 2013 to 2017, they're pretty similar if you get a chance to take a close look at this. What I had actually, again, myself expected was that we would see a number of goals, we'd see an increase in the number of goals either not achieved or partly achieved. And those, again, still tended to hold pretty tightly together. So back to that punchline of the slide a few slides ago, it really does point to the importance of these plans being flexible enough to adjust to changing conditions. But looking at the next slide, why were things not partly achieved? As much as we love to celebrate everything getting taken care of that you plan to and being able to check that box, we also really like to look at, what are the barriers? Why are there limitations and certain goals not being met? Again, here, like COVID is there, but it's not everything. In some instances, a project target or goal was not met all the way. We weren't able to get all of the numbers that we hoped for. The staff or resource constraints or projects not being sustainable showed up also throughout the evaluation reports. And that's not uncommon for, a lot of projects. I would imagine if you're looking at other funding projects that you have outside of the LSTA grants, this happens. And it's easy when you're thinking about your plans to want to be able to solve all of the problems, and then the actual function of implementing change can just be more work than you anticipated. So we definitely saw that show up and partly achieved. In some instances, the outcomes were difficult to measure. And our discussion questions today are really going to be around those measurement questions. You're just in the process of getting your plans in or have just submitted them. And so thinking about how you're going to start measuring some of this data now is going to help you 5 years from now when you're trying to go back through all of the historical documentation and try and gather that information. But outcomes it's a difficult thing to measure. And so, that can contribute to partly achieved. And then not having partners or partner engagement can be a reason for partly achieved also. Looking at the next slide, why were some things reported as not achieved? In some instances, the trainings or projects were just not implemented, COVID disruptions again, and then these overly ambitious goals. Trying to bite off more than you can chew can lead to a not achieved goal. So moving into the focal areas, drilling down to the next level, we'll see here that all of the focal areas increased. What I think is really interesting in this data point, you'll see gray is 2013 to 2017, blue, the top bars are 2018 to 2022. Civic engagement grew. And I know that 5 years ago, we might not have been able to predict all of the disruptions that have occurred in the past 5 years. So I think this one is super interesting to try and chew on a little bit. Why, we saw this grow. Was it just because of some of the COVID and societal disruptions, and this is an area of adjustment? Or is it something that libraries have been planning and, we're just really well positioned to be able to take on when the disruptions happen? If we look at the beneficiary groups on the next slide, you'll see we have library workforce, again, tends to be one of our biggest beneficiary groups. And if you, and in some instances, we definitely had states that didn't have substantial focus on any specific groups, which is fine. It's a really good insight that we continue to chew on here at IMLS to think about how we can better capture this information. And then looking at the cycle comparison on the next slide, there's another question around that I have when I look at this data around the children demographic in particular. 2013 to 2017 is on the left, gray bar, 2018 to 2022 is on the right. And we see that the children beneficiary group dropped quite significantly. Is that because there were more general programs? Is that because there was a shift across other beneficiary groups? This is a this is something that, you know, certainly if you have any thoughts, I'm happy to hear why we saw these numbers change. And now if we move on to the next slide, looking at the comments, I want to take a quick pause and say the Grants to States team's just such a good job of tracking the data from all of the evaluations. So when I went in and was able to look at the overall comments that came through, it was really easy to see some standout things that showed up across all evaluations. Some of this Talitha talked about because it showed up in the community of practice. It's something that we've been mulling over again for a while. Who gets counted in the beneficiary groups? What ends up being the real important number? If there's a universal program that reaches a lot of people, and we know that within, you know, that program we're reaching specific demographic groups and we don't count them, you know, it may not, you know, we may be undercounting a particular beneficiary group. And we also see the guidelines are for activities and not funds. So if the way that we're distributing money actually does get to a beneficiary group, how do we count that? And that's just something that we don't have an answer for right now. But we saw that loud and clear throughout the evaluations. We just have a few more slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to discussions. The SPR data, you're going to spend plenty of time talking about this afternoon and throughout the conference, I'm sure. One of the things we certainly hope the SPR data does is help you with the completion of your evaluation, and we did see that show up. But using the SPR data isn't just for the evaluation. It collects a lot more data than you end up reporting to us. So we did see some really good examples of how you all have been able to use that data. And we certainly hope that we can continue to help strengthen the connection between SPR data, reporting, collection, plan, and evaluation work, because it's such a great data resource. And a couple of great examples on the next slide here come straight out of the reports. One is out of Colorado and one is out of North Carolina. Colorado reported, compared to the 2013-2017 evaluation, CSL had improved dramatically in its compliance with the LSTA program reporting system in terms of both output and outcome data collection. So in this example, we see that data collection became easier, and hopefully that meant that the evaluation reporting also became easier. And then North Carolina reported, review of SPR data provides some clear opportunities for economizing on shared learnings, or might allow trainers to establish train-the-trainer models to capitalize on individualized areas of expertise. And we at IMLS talk a lot about how do we share best practices, how do we improve peer-to-peer engagement. You know, this is a great idea of how we could be better utilizing this great resource of SPR data. So just appreciate both of these quotes. You know, everybody did a great job of submitting their evaluations. It was great to talk to the Grants to States team and ask them how they thought the evaluations went this time around. And because we were able to provide more focused attention through the community of practice, because we had a number of team members who were here in the last evaluations, they talked about how while there might have been more engagement in the back and forth of, you know, what needed to be added or clarifications and evaluation plan that came through, overall we saw kind of just a better comprehensive set of evaluations come in the door. So, you know, thank you again to those of you who participated in the community of practice. And thank you to those of you who were able to really utilize learnings from the last time around, and really everybody who did such great due diligence on getting your evaluations in. We're going to I'm going to go over to one more slide and turn it over to Talitha in a second. But you might be asking, why are we talking about evaluation at the beginning of the conference when we're really starting to focus on plans? Well, what you just went through, all of all of the feelings of challenges and successes and reliving the last 5 years is going to influence how you're going to be able to carry these plans forward. And certainly we hope that you can be using the learnings from the evaluations to start thinking about how to set up plan measurement success over the next 5 years. So that, Talitha, over to you to talk about this last slide.
Great, thank you. Am I unmuted successfully?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yes.
Great. So you already heard some of these reflected in what I shared and what Emily shared and probably even what Terry shared, and this is reporting back to you and your ideas. But the big take-home messages from the community of practice for applying it to the 5-year plan were to really think about measurement. And I realize that the deadline is approaching. Some people have already submitted. There is some time. Maybe you already did this. But ask yourself, can you define a measure for something? Like, can you say, oh, we can have a percentage target for something? How precise can you define it? Then that might lead to, is this aspirational or operational? If it's harder to define, it might be more on the aspirational side. Can you break up those aspirational end goals into shorter term operational goals? And then, are they achievable, and what does achievement mean? It's important to think about that and not just kind of go forth and go, oh, well, and then in the end, you're like, what are we doing? Are there too many? 3 to 4 might be a sweet spot. Again, think about the number and look at your past goals and use these questions to identify and clarify perceptions and expectations. And it's very helpful. And this is all from the community of practice. The second big bucket was to plan for data collection and analysis. Emily just mentioned this. So I'm getting a feedback on myself, hopefully. All right. So anyway, earlier in the main discussion topics I shared, one comment was about being able to reach out back to end user groups. So you need to plan for that ahead of time. Direct contact or general contact is helpful for your evaluators. And so this is planning for the evaluation in your 5-year plan. And so for analysis, think about how you're going to triangulate data across your multiple sources of data, like the SPR, surveys, and interviews. So think about that stuff ahead of time and think about it for your 5-year plan. And the last one might seem kind of obvious, but it's surprisingly not practically obvious. So plan to use your data and then use it to leverage successful implementation that leads to achieving your goals. It might seem like you're just going to automatically do things. It's really not actually always the case without an action plan. Oftentimes, evaluations that are really good pieces of work kind of sit in a corner of your computer gathering electronic dust. Don't let that happen. So with that, we're going to have a group activity kind of reflecting on these takeaways. To reflect on the evaluations and what were the hardest things to measure, what were the easiest things to measure, how can you take the hard ones, lessons from the easy ones, and apply them to the hard ones to measure, how can you break things up to make them easier to measure. So that's for this morning, and then just a preview of the afternoon is talking about anticipating how to measure things in the new plans in terms of your goals, focal areas, and beneficiaries.
So with that, we're going to take the next about 15 minutes, talk at your tables, chat. We'll all be just powering away through chat, and we'll just talk about what were the hardest things to measure, easiest things to measure, and then we'll do a quick round robin report out before we wrap up today's session.
All right, the timer is set, 15 minutes to discuss what was hardest to measure and what was easiest to measure in your evaluations. So we're going to move into the next phase, and I'm going to let either Emily tee this up or Madison.
Yeah, we just want to do a round robin of the room. So if someone from each table can pop up at the mic and just share a quick summary of what you heard. And then we can wrap up with chat. Excuse me.
Don't make me call on you. Who's going to be our first brave volunteer? Okay, go, Janet. We're going to get you a mic. Janet McKenney.
Well, we kind of got distracted on some procurement issues. The hardest things to measure were, so many impromptu meetings and Zoom meetings, and were they consulting, were they continuing education, large, small, or whatever. We didn't really. That was a challenge, and so we probably didn't accurately, I know in Maine, we didn't accurately measure the level of participation and have very specific outcomes for these meetings. It was just more sustaining everybody and keeping, in Maine, we were working on, just how to open safely and working with DECD and stuff. So I think the measurement of activities during COVID was something for the last year of that evaluation that caused problems.
Thank you. Who's next?
So at our table, we all regularly sub-award, and one thing we talked about was how hard it was to measure kind of the juicy bits from our sub-awardees to get the good data that we all want.
Yeah, and that showed up a lot in chat too. Sub-awards, not only measuring sub-awards, but for people sub-awarding for the first time, just how challenging it was to get that in place. Thank you. Who's next?
Hey, we talked about some of the hardest things to measure in the evaluation. We had somebody here at the table whose state had too many goals. It makes it really hard to evaluate. There was a lack of continuity in staffing, made it really hard to evaluate. And in Maryland, I think right now we're juggling a little over 90 subgrants. Last year we did 120, and it's really sometimes difficult, as the other table mentioned, to get good reporting from our subgrantees. They don't really fully understand the difference sometimes between outputs and outcomes. The easiest part of doing the evaluation was that our evaluators could just use the SPR data. This made it kind of really easy for us. So, thank you.
Oh, that's great. Great to hear. Yay for SPR data use.
We talked a little bit sort of higher level, not drilling down so much. For me in Rhode Island, we have a hard time because I don't think we planned out exactly everything we were gonna, all those questions that were up on the last slide before. And it sounds like in Mississippi they do that, and so they have a really easy time of seeing what they have, and we have a little bit of a harder time. So I think that's a great lesson to get at this moment. So that's kind of what we talked about.
We talked about at the goal level that aspirational goals were probably a little harder to measure than the practical operational goals, and that most of us at the table had the practical and operational goals more so than the aspirational.
Yeah, that's great. How else are we doing on tables? I can only see half a room at a time.
Right. Our table. Oh, I think we got one more coming.
Yeah. So our table talked about aspirational and operational goals too being difficult and easier. And for my state, I think that we need to probably focus more on anecdotal information and get those true stories instead of just the statistical data.
Thank you for that. What we heard in chat.
We got one more. One more in the room.
One more. Okay.
Okay. I think what we talked about, what were the hardest things to measure, were the things that in the evaluation, and my people can correct me, when not asking the right questions and not asking specific enough questions. That made things really hard to measure, and it's like if you get it right and you can keep coming back to it, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, and that's a great concluding point, because that's, you know, you're thinking about that fresh with the plans now, and that's certainly where you want to be while you're in this process of getting things set up for the next 5 years. We had a really active chat. I'll just sum up a couple of things and then I'll turn it back to Terry. There were definitely challenges around getting surveys and feedback, data from virtual participants or data from those sub-grants. That showed up quite a bit. The supply chain issues and being able to measure around the challenges of supply chains were definitely a challenge. We'll see if that ends up being unique just to a couple of years, hopefully so. Maura Walsh actually shared a very popular, sorry to call you out, Maura, but she made a very popular comment. We made definitions for consulting hours based on IMLS feedback in a webinar they hosted and gave our consultants hard and fast measurements to follow, but she shared it was not popular. That was a popular comment in chat, and certainly something that was intriguing to those who heard the idea. I just want to thank you all for your participation today. Thanks for dealing with our floating heads and you know, all of the issues with Zoom, but we appreciate getting a chance to share with you all of your hard work.
And I just wanted to quickly thank everyone as well. I'm new to the library world and I've learned a lot, and I'm so impressed by all of you. And go forth and you can do hard things.
Well, there are no two floating heads I'd rather co-pilot with here than yours, Talitha and Emily. Thank you so much. We're going to head into a break now till the top of the hour, so please be back. It's a little less than 15 minutes. Welcome back from break. Thanks to the virtual participants for accommodating our little sideline conversations up here. We're aware. We're going to watch what we say now during the break. We didn't say anything bad, but I don't even remember. I am so excited about this next session because IMLS did a research study that was a long time in the making and finally got published last fall. It was kind of a under-the-radar publication that I don't think a lot of people read. It was long, but it had a lot of interesting graphics in it. And what we thought we'd do is give you a nice synopsis of it in the form of our colleagues from the Office of Research and Evaluation so that you can really get the highlights and think about it as we start to launch these 5-year plans. In a testament to more of Matt Birnbaum's empire building, he's over here, by the way, he brought on, yes, round of applause for Matt. He somehow brought on a PhD fellow to his team to do lots of work, lots of really interesting work. And Madison Sampson is finishing her dissertation at George Washington University, so just a wealth of knowledge. Yeah, kudos to her. So she has been with us on this journey of what social well-being looks like for IMLS, and was an instrumental part of a conference that we held in March. It was a director's initiative, and she's going to talk a little bit about that, along with Emily Plowman, who's going to join us again virtually. But since Madison's here, I'm going to yield the dais to her, and we'll get started.
Sure. We can welcome Emily back. She's going to get us started.
Madison, we cannot hear you on mic unless you're at the podium. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, Emily, you want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, sounds good. Okay, so we're actually going to be talking about 3 big topics today: social well-being, literacy, and libraries. And if we go to the first slide, what IMLS is trying to do after we've published our social well-being research is really try and hone in on one of the core elements of what it means to be a library, which is promote literacy and help with reading within communities. And so today I'm just going to talk through, the two of us are going to talk through a couple of IMLS investments and show kind of what we've done and where we hope to go. And then we're going to have some great opportunity to talk about all three topics in today's session. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to start by talking about where IMLS is invested in that overlap of social well-being and libraries. And on the next slide, we'll highlight this paper that we published last October, where IMLS funded the Reinvestment Fund and some of their partners to go out and look at a number of different elements of social well-being within communities. For the purpose of the paper, we focused on the idea that social well-being focuses on the direct and indirect ways that libraries and museums create social value. The dimensions of well-being, their efforts support, the institutional structures they employ, the partnerships they develop, and the positions they occupy within broader networks of social well-being. And this is definitely something from my very first time starting to work in libraries, especially with a lot of all the work we did at PLA on Project Outcome. You know, this question of what is library impact, and what does it look like in terms of how libraries are influencing the social fabric of their communities that they serve. And looking at the next slides, there's just a little bit more overview of this report. But you know, this report was really trying to get at this question from a research perspective. And all of us know anecdotally, we hear from the stories of the librarians, we hear from the communities that we interact with, that there is great value to having a library present in the community, but this was really trying to get to that actual measurement. Such a big, hard question to tackle. So the study activities itself, and you'll see this again in the report that we published online, included a literature review, what already exists out there, and then looking at some county level analysis. So what does the distribution of libraries look like across the United States? What does some similar county level indices look like for social well-being? And then what is the relationship between those two when you try and merge them together? And then we also had a series of case studies, 24 case studies, 12 libraries, 12 museums. And this was really intended to bolster and influence, or to further bolster what we might not be able to see in the data. Again, kind of the richness of what it means to be a library in a community doesn't always come through in the metrics that you collect and report. I'm sure you all feel that very closely right now between the evaluations and the plans. So then if we go to the next slide, what you'll see here is some of the results of the report. And the report, as Terry shared, has a lot of information in it, but this one is a particularly interesting set of data comparison, where on the left, again, you're going to see the distribution of libraries at the county level. For an example, my home state of Iowa has a whole heap of green in it. We know that Iowa has a good representation of libraries in the United States, and then where you see reds, that's where we see less library per person representation. And then on the right, you'll see school effectiveness. So, you know, red shows low school effectiveness, green shows high school effectiveness. And so what this study tried to do was understand if there was a relationship between both of these data sets. So if you go to the next slide, all of the indices that we covered are listed here. The school effectiveness example is the one that we have mapped on the prior slide, but community health ended up being one that we mapped, as well as economic well-being. And on the next slide, what you're actually going to see is what does it mean when we try and put those relationships together. When we actually try and see, is there a relationship between a library being present and the the impact of school effectiveness. In this example, you'll see school is the orange line that looks more like a bowl shape. Blue is the health line, which looks like a check mark. And then lowest to highest indexes of libraries. So where you see a lower presence of libraries, you see kind of the numbers actually tick up a little bit. This would indicate that there is some influence where if you have a lower presence of library, that impact of school or health effectiveness actually is a little bit stronger. And then if it dips down, you'll see that's where maybe there's not as strong of an influence as you would expect to see with a library being present in the school and health effectiveness. And then you see that high line, the blue, this kind of spike up, which is really interesting. This is the health effectiveness where you have a high index of libraries, and you start to see this stronger correlation of health outcomes and higher index of libraries, and to some extent schools also. This is something that is a mixed correlation study. It's really hard to get at this data. It's really hard to make sure that we're measuring these indexes correctly. Was all of the combinations of what we decided to put together in the school index the right set of factors that we use to measure? And we can't say for sure. This is correlation. This is not causation. We can't come out of this paper and say absolutely for sure this is what the effect of libraries are on their communities, but we're starting to see kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the actual data connection between what some of these core metrics are and what library presence means. But what ended up being really interesting that came out of the study is that the case studies did give us that much richer information that, again, you can't just easily collect in the data set. Again, this is a tension that we always run into with what we're trying to talk about when we talk about library value. So when you look at Yavapai County in Arizona, this is just one of the 12, again, you see that we get this really good information that talks about how the library system pools information. It's a single platform catalog. There's a lot of resources that are available to people in the service area that would not be available without the library being present. And so here again, this is not going to be news to anyone on the call or in the room. This talks about that rich story of what libraries do, but how do we do a better job of getting at that measurement? So the study, I went through a whole lot of information very quickly, but it really is, again, just kind of this first inaugural attempt to try and get some research data around what that impact could look like. It gave us some insight, not a ton, but it is starting to point us in a direction where we can now drill down a little deeper. And that's where literacy comes into play. So if we really wanted to focus in one area and invest a lot of resources on research and social well-being impact, literacy is a great place to start with libraries. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Madison, and she'll talk about how literacy comes into it.
All right, so we really want to hear from everyone in the room, so I'm going to go through a brief presentation about the convening that we had in March, and then we'll discuss how all of this continues to come together. So this past March, we really wanted to bring together folks, experts from a few different areas that I'll get to in just a sec, but really to unpack a few guiding questions. So thinking about all of the social well-being work that came out of the study and that we know is going on in your communities, how can we really think about how literacy is improving outcomes for community members, those that are coming into the library space, but also those who the library may not be engaging as well? And also thinking about this idea about library usage being in decline. So a lot of the conversations that came out of Tim Coates' Freckle report really inspired this question around, is there anything that we can do to kind of counter a decline in circulation rates, and if we can or if we can't, let's think really hard about what's at stake in our communities. So our overall goal was really to bring together experts who could facilitate a discussion around those two questions, going through a series of 3 different sessions. It was really awesome to see and meet people in the field. We had the convening take place from March 1st. We had a half day into a full day on the 2nd. At Planet Word Museum, which I highly recommend checking out if you're in the DC area. It's a free museum. It recently opened. This is actually an image from inside the elevators. So they have all of these great books that are just constantly on display, and you can learn about language and things like that. So it was a perfect host for our conversation. The team spent a lot of time selecting folks from the field who could really come together and contribute to these conversations. So we had librarians, various staff members, directors, grant makers, folks who are in the community leading really exciting literacy initiatives like Alvin Irby from Barbershop Books, and then of course all of our amazing IMLS staff members who were able to join us. So once again, we had 3 sessions. Day 1 started with session 1, and then the other 2 sessions took us into day 2, and each session was comprised of a keynote, a panel discussion, folks who were able to respond to the keynote, and then we'd also have a lot of robust conversations at the tables. So our first session really talked about this connectivity between libraries and social well-being. So if we do really believe that libraries make a difference in the outcomes that we're seeing in our community members, let's think deeply about what the research is saying and also what folks are seeing on the ground. Session 2 was more about resources, what we're doing with our tangible and intangible resources in the library space to facilitate literacy and community engagement. So we also had awesome researchers and folks from local libraries who were able to come and share their experiences and facilitate discussions. And then third, we had a final session about brain science and what's really happening when folks are reading at every stage in human development. So we had Marianne Wolf there and folks who are from different community initiatives across the nation, and as well as funders talking about the importance of centering literacy in the work that we do. So we had a good time, and we like to think that we were doing a good job, but it was also important for us to hear from participants. So our colleague Talitha that you heard from earlier circulated a survey and was able to yield really good feedback for us. Across the board, we had a really high response rate to the survey, another nudge to do the survey after this conference each day. But also, we had almost half of the participants express interest in continuing the conversation. So in addition to that, each session also received really high marks. The only thing folks really wanted to do more was to discuss one-on-one, which is a really great indicator for us so that we know that we're encouraging and inspiring this conversation around literacy and this responsibility of libraries to really wrap their arms around social well-being challenges or obstacles in their community and drive forward towards solutions. In addition to that, we also learned, had some really meaningful takeaways. So in addition to how folks felt, there was a lot of data collected throughout each session. So at each table, similarly to how this room is set up, we had an IMLS staff member at each table taking notes throughout the day. And so we collected data on information that the keynotes said, the panelists shared. Lots of interesting and thought-provoking comments were made at the mics during Q&A. We also had a parking lot section of the room where folks could leave Post-it notes, in addition to table activities that were happening. So in total, we received about 600 or so comments as folks were really processing and grappling with all of the information that was being shared with them throughout the day. And that took us through many, many hours and weeks of sorting and transcribing all of those notes, which then led us to coding all of those comments into 6 different themes and trying to really, in the spirit of being as responsive and accountable to what the stakeholders in the space shared, trying to figure out what we could do to operationalize their ideas as an IMLS agency. So what those themes really ended up looking like were these 6 ideas that you see here. And so a lot of ideas came out around theme 1, library, identity, purpose, and branding. So we're here, we're talking about literacy, we're talking about books, but is the book our only brand? What else are libraries doing? What can we do to advance that or advocate for that? And when we're thinking about libraries as a free good, how can we incentivize the community to really come back into the library and engage with us? The second theme that emerged was around literacy development and engagement. So thinking about how we can constantly be engaging not only children or folks with families or in family units, but what else are we doing to make sure folks who are trying to enter the workforce are also equipped with all of the literacy skills that they need to be successful. And then this sub-theme emerged there around navigating digital transformation. So with COVID, lots of questions came up around the value of ebooks. How do we define literacy? Is the book the only way that folks engage with literacy? So lots of interesting thoughts there. The third theme that came up was around funding and IMLS grant making. A lot of the comments in that space existed around accessibility and making sure all of our smaller or rural libraries felt like they could navigate the process and be as competitive as others when they're working through our IMLS opportunities. Fourth, research, data, and evaluation. As you can imagine, based on all of the comments that you made earlier and everything we've been talking about so far today, there are a lot of questions about measuring impact in a real way and thinking about this tension between data and hard numbers and stories. The fifth theme that emerged was supporting the LIS field and library workforce, and a lot of ideas that came out there revolved around diversifying the force. Not only how can we reach more people of color, but how can we retain folks in the profession, but also out in our communities. And really interesting ideas about what it would look like to maybe pilot having trauma-informed staff members, social workers in the library space. And lastly, this theme about best practices and programs. So a real desire to learn from each other and to continue networking in spaces like this to figure out how we can best serve the community in really innovative ways. And one thing I want to call out is this equity piece. So equity was really weaved throughout each of those themes. They're really responsive and interesting questions that were posed throughout the entire discussion. So it was really exciting to see that as we were doing the data analysis. So what's next? This really revolves around this idea of thinking about how we can really define literacy. So you'll see these are IMLS, our current definitions on the IMLS website. And we're really going to be leaning on you all to think about how we can expand or refine what we're talking about when we think about literacy, because that's going to be what's informative for describing our research agenda and moving these conversations forward. All right. I think we're going to hand it back over to Emily.
Thank you, Madison. So if you have been able to follow along so far in that speed round of research overview, what you'll see on this slide is where we're at now and where we're hoping to go in the future. We could have spent days talking about any one of these 2 literacy or social well-being topics, but the big takeaway is that this investment in the social well-being research pointed us to some mixed results about causation and correlation of libraries and communities, but we also know that libraries have a really relevant role, a really active role in the literacy space. There's certainly a lot of other work that libraries do, but if we wanted to really target one indice in one area, what does it look like if we try and merge all of those 3 topics together? So we've done the social well-being in libraries and literacy research. Now we really want to try and look at what is that intersection of all 3 topics. And how does this relate to you? How does this relate to your planning and evaluation work? Well, we went in and we looked at not only what we'd heard from what libraries wanted out of literacy report, we went in and we looked at some of what's been reported in the evaluations, some of the grant funds that we've distributed over the years that fall under a loose bucket of literacy. And even within how IMLS receives information from the field, from you, from libraries on literacy, that definition can be really wide and it can count a lot of things, or it can also be really narrow. I want to go to the next slide because I really think that the next set of questions are where we're going to want you to focus today's discussion on. Again, we went through this really fast. Certainly, if you have questions for Madison or myself on the research in greater detail, we are here to answer those. But what we want to hear from you at your tables is as IMLS moves into this next round of investment, when we're looking at literacy and we're looking at influence of literacy in the social well-being, and what it means for communities, you're in this really unique space at the state level where while we hear at the library level a lot of stories, a lot of anecdotes about how they're doing these programs, you're in a position where you're able to really think collectively about what does that look like in your state. And so thinking about your plans, thinking about your evaluations, are there new literacy concepts that might have popped up during COVID and CARES that you can start to think about in the concept of how did it help communities during the pandemic? When you're looking at your evaluations, even pre-pandemic, or thinking about your plans moving forward or what you've heard from the field, where are concepts around literacy and social well-being that you could start to identify that are emerging that you can easily start to point to in a discussion? This is really where IMLS wants to be making sure we are staying focused in our research, because there's so much work that's gone in the field. There's so much history in talking about literacy in libraries, but how can modern literacy be better measured in that social well-being space? So with that, we're going to turn it over to the tables again. I'll be moderating chat and answering these questions. We'll go for about 10 minutes. And then we'll go ahead and do another report out like we did before. Although at this time we'll pull our virtual attendees chat up first, and then we'll wrap up with the round robin in the room.
Thank you for indulging with us during that brainstorming session. Are there any tables who want to send a brave representative to the mic to share? Or I don't know if we have mics to circulate again. We have Cindy and Dennis. Or I'm sorry, Emily, you wanted the
yeah,
chat.
Actually, if I can represent chat quick while your tables figure out who's going to represent you. And Madison, I just want to say the chat for the virtual attendees was blowing up. So I don't want to say that any particular platform is more successful than another, but we had some pretty good ideas show up. What I think was really compelling about so much of what we heard in the chat was this idea around what are the factors that influence literacy. So it wasn't that, we definitely talked about digital literacy, media literacy, certain literacy programs that states might offer, but there was this really interesting thread that kept showing up where people were talking about access, equity, what does disparity look like, and that really does influence how well someone you can influence literacy within a community. So I love that we ended up staying in this area of themes around the factors instead of just kind of going through a long list of specific literacy programs. I will say, I kind of wondered if David out of Florida was a Crosby plant. One of the comments he made specifically was, you can't have great social well-being if you don't have a literate community. That is straight out of the mouth of Crosby. And that's definitely what we're trying to get at. So, just a lot of great comments. We'll make sure, I've been recording them, we'll make sure we'll share them out. Thank you, virtual attendees, for participation. People in the room, let's hear what you all have.
All right, you've set the bar high, but we have really good ideas in here too, I'm sure. Don't let me down in the room.
Well, we talked about how our state libraries are good at some literacies, but there are others, like the pandemic brought out culinary literacy being an issue, or financial literacy, how can you address those others? Mm-hmm. And then we also talked about being really careful how you approach your libraries with this language. We're both from very red states, so some of these words can be really hot buttons. So how can you talk about does your community have a need here, and where could you help plug into that need to just make sure they stay engaged with the conversation so you're still accomplishing the work, but kind of removing that filter.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. Any other comments in the room?
Hey, we really talked about during COVID, we really saw the need for outreach. We also saw that public schools kind of dropped the ball, and libraries in many ways picked up the slack. We saw a lot more homeschooling, a lot more cooperation in that area. Let's see. Oh, there was so much. Oh, yeah, so we also saw the huge digital divide. The kids were out of school, they didn't have access to the internet, they might not have a computer at home. I know Maryland responded by, a lot of our grants were about Wi-Fi, lending Wi-Fi hotspots, lending Chromebooks, just getting the materials out, the digital materials.
Awesome, thank you.
We talked about a lot of the things that other people have mentioned, but one thing that I just wanted to bring up that we discussed was in the States here at our table, we have a lot of one-person libraries, part-time people running those libraries, a lot of them without a degree. And that makes it really challenging to try to help them with this idea of implementing any kind of literacy in any of those categories across the board, and trying to figure out ways in our states in which to have them be supported by their peers and not just relying on us to, for example, there's a lot of problems with operating an OWL. If you've ever tried it, good luck. Okay, so I just, we can't always be the ones that are in the room with them, troubleshooting with them to help them with, say, that kind of digital literacy. They need to learn to start to rely on each other, and so we're trying to figure out ways to foster that kind of collaboration so that we're able to help them to a point, but they need to also help themselves and rely on their communities around them, not just in their specific town.
Awesome, thank you. Any other ideas, reactions?
I just wanted to mention at our table we had a bit of a tangential discussion about the difficulties once we identified some of these literacies that the different libraries were focusing on, that sometimes just getting it out to the community, that marketing and advertising and getting that word of mouth out was where we were really seeing struggles. Just because a lot of the staff, they didn't have the time, they didn't have the training, and this goes for state staff, this goes for the, down to the rural libraries, that even if we had those digital offerings, or literacy offerings of different types, letting the community know that this was a resource for them could be challenging.
Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of head nods with that one, thank you. Any other ideas in the room? All right, one more.
Good morning. One thing that we also discussed was the need for partnership, like with nonprofits. Sorry, I have a problem in my library. During COVID, a lot of our staff members brought their children to our libraries, and we got to see firsthand on the needs. So it was a great way to find out what our community needed, to base the programs for the outreach, because when the wonderful funding came in for ARPA and for CARES Act, we were able to look at those needs and positively address them. So we're really grateful for the funding. And then another thing that I learned is a lot of people are very uncomfortable talking and reading in front of people. So we partnered with the local animal shelter, and we're getting service animals, and people are going to be making 10 and 15-minute appointments at every age to be able to practice to read out loud and build their confidence. Another thing we were able to do is we have a regional library for the blind and physically challenged, where our librarian too reached out to each and every patron that we have to see what their needs are and how we can address them. So we were able to get, I think, more outreach done. So the COVID pandemic kind of was good for us as well, because we're still in the rebuilding stages from 2 Cat 5 hurricanes. So we were able to get out there to do the service for the community that we needed.
Awesome. What state are you from?
We're the United States Virgin Islands.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
I'd like to make an appointment to read with a dog in about a week and a half after ALA. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Emily, do you want to close us out?
Well, also, add me to the list of reading with a dog, especially in the Virgin Islands. I'll take that in a second. Thank you, everybody, for your time, energy, and comments today. I'm going to get real wonky here for a second, but the data that you report in the SPR that sometimes can feel really heavy and weedy, and what you're reporting in the evaluations and what you're putting together in the plans is going to really inform a lot of this literacy work that we have going forward. It's a super rich data set that we can be going to, and even in the short discussion that we've had today, you're pointing to so many different issues and angles that we could be considering. So thank you for all your hard work. This is the last you'll see of me as a floating head at the conference. I sure wish I could have been there in person, but this is such a great group. Every time I get a chance to interact with you all and the state people, I just feel so inspired about all the good work that's going on out there. So enjoy your lunch. I'll turn it over to Terry. Thank you, Madison, for being ready on the fly for this, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Emily and Madison, and all the attendees for your participation.